One night, I got into a fight with my girlfriend and went to my dorm. I managed to ride the subway before it closed and walked, shivering from the cold, 200 meters to the tram stop. The lamp above it was not lit. There were no people. I had already begun to remember whether the trams were still running at this time, but the approaching roar and creaking dispelled my doubts. The source of the sound came around the bend and stopped, hesitated a little, and opened the doors. "Are you still traveling?" I asked the driver, an unshaven man in orange overalls. "Or already at the depot?" "Last tram," muttered the driver, impatiently tapping his fingers on his knee. I didn't bother bothering him any further, sighed with relief and walked into the completely empty salon. For some reason, the lamps inside winked from time to time, as if the tram's eyes were also closing their eyes. I sat in one of the last seats. I always like to watch other passengers. How they dress, what they talk about, what kind of faces do they look at through the windows? Do they smile when they meet the gaze of their reflection? I always smiled. The tram rattled as it picked up speed. He drove through several stops without stopping. Still, there was no one there. At the next one, he stopped and let in a stooped man in a black cloak with a raised collar. He coughed as he entered and sat down in one of the first seats. I couldn't see him, so I turned on the player so as not to fall asleep. Two people entered through the stop, a young boy in a dirty sweatshirt with the hood pulled up and an elderly woman in a purple cloak. Very beautiful. She seemed to be returning from some restaurant. She was wearing gold glitter and was carrying a tiny handbag. And what is she doing on the tram? An expensive car driven by her young boyfriend would suit her better. The woman sat down on a single seat in the middle of the cabin. The boy sat on a double seat, placing a bulky backpack next to him and turning to the window. The tram started moving again. I glanced out the back window. There were rails running around the bend, illuminated by the light of lanterns and in places blocked by the foliage of trees. A black cat ran across them, the white tip of its tail flashing in the light. There was no one at the next stop either, and the tram was about to pass by. But a pale figure suddenly stepped out of the shadows, and he hastily stopped and opened the doors. I'd almost dozed off, but I glanced sideways without interest at the passenger who had entered, and then he jumped up. "Girl, what's wrong with you?" She was all wet from head to toe, and almost naked, wrapped only in a bath towel. This alone would be enough to be surprised, but the towel was covered in blood. It was soaked almost through, half turning a pale pink color, and purple spots at the top where the towels touched the hand. His hands were also covered in blood. "We need to call an ambulance." In two leaps, I find myself in front of her, grabbing her cold hands. Indeed, there are a number of deep cuts on them, from which blood is already sluggishly flowing. I look into the girl's face, how beautiful and pale as death. Only her eyes, under which there are dark circles, are wide open, as if she is surprised by my reaction. God, yes, things are really bad. We need to stop the bleeding, but help me in the end. I shout, looking around the cabin and the few passengers, but no one even moves. The tram calmly picks up speed, as if there is no bloody girl on board, ready to die at any moment. I feel for my mobile phone in my pocket. No network. Crap. Do you have telephones? Give me the phone, somebody. I almost scream. Am I dreaming? This simply cannot be. Why don't you help me? The man in the raincoat only slouches even more and turns away. The boy clutches his backpack to himself and hides his face in his hands. Only the woman slowly gets up, walks towards me, and takes my hand. He shakes his gray head and speaks in a hoarse voice, which also instantly makes my throat sore. "Boy, you won't help her anymore, and so do we. What are you talking about?" I stammer, helplessly looking from the bloody towel to the calm face of the woman. She slowly pulls down the collar of her blouse. "We're all dead here." There are fingerprints on her neck, burgundy, almost black. So that's why she wheezes so much. It's strange that he was able to board this tram alive. "Yes," the dead girl answers in a weak voice, snatching her hand from my numb fingers. Very strange. Not knowing what to think, I turn to the man in the front seat. He smiles bitterly and shows the bullet hole on his chest. Very small, slightly burnt on the front. I understand that the back of his black coat is not so shiny because of the designer fabric. It was soaked in blood. I feel bad. I reach for the button on the handrail to ask the driver to let me out. The woman shakes her head as she sits down. "It's impossible to get out of here, boy. There is only one stop, the final one. Only the guide can let you through these doors." I sob faintly. On weak legs, I walk to the far seat. My head is spinning, and I don't have enough air. The bloody girl picks up 2 coins from the floor that fell out when I grabbed her hands and sits down on a seat nearby. I'm afraid to look in her direction, and even more afraid to see what's hiding under the teenager's hood. It seemed to me that there was something oily glistening there. Oh my God. The tram stops again. A crying girl in a hospital gown comes in, cradling some kind of bundle. Well, of course, stop maternity hospital. I was shaking. Every time the tram slowed down, everything inside became cold. I was afraid that it would stop and someone so terrible would get on, because there are different types of deaths. No, don't think about it. And about what the final stop is. Well done, driver. The last tram, you say, and you can't argue that he really is the last. Despite my prayers, the tram still stopped. The new passenger talked about something with the driver, turned the turnstile, and entered the cabin. I didn't see the reason for his death, and he didn't look like a dead man. A tall, gray-haired man in a black robe, pale hands with thin fingers, bright blue, piercing eyes, the smile of a professional psychotherapist. So that's what you are, guide. We'll give you the fare, he says loudly in a deep voice in which priests perform ceremonies in church. But travel, passengers take coins out of their pockets, the same as the ones the girl dropped. Ancient, dented, green in places. The man with the bullet wound is the first to pay. He gives the money and says something with a sad smile. The conductor answers. The passenger's smile becomes sincere. He obediently throws his head back, and the guide puts coins on his eyes. The man seems to freeze, and the guide moves on to the next one. This is a woman in a scarlet cloak. They ask her about something. She laughs hoarsely. I'm more concerned about meeting my first husband, and I won't see this bastard again. He has no place in heaven. The right attitude, the guide approves, placing coins on his painted eyelids. The woman freezes, a satisfied smile on her lips. The next one is a girl with a child. She sobs loudly when the guy places very tiny coins, about the size of a penny, on the baby's eyelids. Then he says something, and the girl suddenly calms down. And then he freezes, throwing back his head, copper circles on his eyelids, his hand still pressing the bundle with the child to his chest. When it's the boy's turn, I close my eyes. Opening his eyes a minute later, I see that he has already become numb, and the guide is covering his face with a white silk scarf. God, thank you. Now it's the girl's turn in the towel. They are talking about something. The guide takes one coin from her. He meets my surprised gaze and winks. This is an advance. The girl approaches the door and presses the button. The tram begins to slow down. Now the guide turns to me. The lights on the tram are flashing. All passengers except two are frozen with their heads thrown back. My heart slows down along with the tram. What will happen to me? You are a free rider with us, says the guide, and it seems I took the wrong tram. We'll have to drop you off. You'll get there on foot. There's nothing you can do at the end for now. Thank you, I stutter with joy. Really, they're letting me go. The tram stops. The doors open with a hiss and the girl and I step out. As soon as she steps on the ground, she turns into a transparent silhouette, softly glowing in the darkness, and a second later disappears into the air. So this is what the advances the guide was talking about. She's a ghost now. I turn around, hoping to have time to thank my savior. But there is nothing behind me. All you can hear is the slowly receding sound of a tram. That night, I walked home, and the next morning I could hardly believe that all this was not a dream. A couple of years later, that trip became a vague memory. Even later, I was completely forgotten. But now I'm already 48 years old. I put my sons to bed and kissed my wife goodnight. I went to my desk, hoping that I could write a couple more chapters for the new novel. But that evening, I never sat down at the computer. There were coins on the desktop. 2 coins darkened by time. I'm sitting in a wicker chair in the yard. Here in the suburbs, there are no trams, but I hear one of them approaching my house. My last tram.